Welcome back to the Political Pulse 2.0. Today we're diving into a topic that goes beyond headlines and into the heart of why millions of people are fleeing their countries to come to Europe and America. And here's the hard truth. Much of the destruction and destabilization of these nations can be traced back to European and American interests. Yet, when these refugees arrive, they're demonized for not assimilating or being seen as a drain on infrastructure. But what's really going on here? Let's break it down. Let's start with the Middle East. For decades, Western powers have had their hands in the region. The US invasion of Iraq in 2003, justified by claims of weapons of mass destruction, destabilized the entire region. What followed were years of civil war, insurgencies, and the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. Millions of Iraqis were displaced as their country's infrastructure crumbled. According to Brown University's Costs of War project, over 9 million people have been displaced due to the Iraq War alone. And while Iraq was left in ruins, Western oil companies made massive profits from the region's resources. The same story is playing out in Syria. Civil war, fueled by foreign intervention and proxy battles between global powers, has led to one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time. US, European, and Russian interests have all played roles in the conflict, which has forced nearly 7 million Syrians to flee their homes, according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. And yet when these refugees seek asylum in Europe and the US, they are often met with hostility. But it's not just the Middle East. Africa has long been a battleground for European and American corporate interests. From the exploitation of natural resources in the Congo to the extraction of oil in Nigeria, Western multinational corporations have reaped the benefits while leaving behind environmental destruction and political chaos. According to Human Rights Watch, in the Niger Delta, oil spills caused by multinational corporations like Shell have devastated local communities, ruining farmland and water supplies. This environmental destruction has fueled internal displacement and poverty, pushing people to migrate in search of better opportunities. In many African nations, the legacy of European colonialism left behind fragile political systems which have been further undermined by Western-backed regime changes. Libya is a prime example. Once one of Africa's wealthiest countries, Libya was thrown into chaos after a NATO-led intervention that toppled Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The resulting power vacuum led to civil war, human trafficking, and widespread violence, forcing thousands of Libyans to flee to Europe. Libya, once one of the richest countries, is now one of the poorest in Africa. Let that sink in. But instead of addressing the root causes, Europe has closed its borders to many of these refugees. And let's not forget Latin America and the Caribbean. The US has a long history of intervening in the region's politics to protect its corporate interests. In Guatemala, a US-backed coup in 1954 overthrew a democratically elected government to protect the interests of the United Fruit Company. Decades of civil war and dictatorship followed, displacing millions. Haiti, one of the first nations to violently overthrow slavery in the West, has been paying for their audacity ever since. Being forced to pay France reparations after ending chattel slavery, let that sink in. Also, in Haiti, US and European interventions have consistently and constantly destabilized the country, from the 1915 US occupation to backing coups against Haitian leaders. Haitians have fled their country due to political unrest, poverty, and natural disasters worsened by the country's weak infrastructure, much of which can be tied back to foreign intervention. Yet when these migrants arrive at US borders, they are often criminalized and deported. According to the Migration Policy Institute, the Trump administration ended temporary protected status, or TPS, for tens of thousands of Haitians in 2017, despite ongoing instability in their homeland. And here's where the narrative becomes dangerous. Instead of acknowledging the role Western powers have played in destabilizing these regions, we focus on the problems these migrants bring. They're accused of not assimilating, of being a drain on infrastructure, and of contributing to crime. But the real question is, why aren't we talking about how American and European policies created the very conditions that force people to flee their homes in the first place? But this pattern of intervention goes far beyond the Middle East and Africa. Let's list examples of how American and European actions have destabilized countries across the globe, leading to mass migration and civil unrest. Here are some specific examples. 1. Remember Guatemala in 1954. The U.S. orchestrated a coup to protect the United Fruit Company's interests, leading to decades of civil war and displacement. 2. Congo in the 1960s. Belgium and the U.S. supported the assassination of Patrice Lumumba and propped up the dictator Mobutu, destabilizing the region. 3. Chile in 1973. The U.S. backed a coup to overthrow democratically elected Salvador Allende, installing Pinochet's dictatorship. 4. Honduras in 2009. U.S. support for a military coup that ousted President Zelaya led to political chaos and widespread violence. 5. El Salvador in the 1980s. U.S. funded military forces during the Civil War, exacerbating violence that drove thousands to migrate. 6. Iran in 1953. U.S. and U.K. orchestrated a coup to overthrow Prime Minister Mossadegh, reinstating the Shah, which led to long-term instability. 7. Afghanistan in the 1980s. U.S. funded Mujahideen fighters during the Soviet invasion, contributing to ongoing conflict and migration. 8. Haiti in 1991 and 2004. U.S. involvement in coups that overthrew elected governments led to instability and mass migration. 9. Nicaragua in the 1980s. U.S. support for the Contras in opposition to the Sandinista government led to a prolonged civil war. 10. Somalia from the 1990s to the present. U.S. military intervention and drone strikes exacerbated conflict and instability, driving displacement. These examples show how foreign interventions contribute to the collapse of governance and economies, pushing people to flee. Noticing a pattern? So what's really going on here? Why are we so distracted from the truth? The narrative of migrants as a threat to Western society conveniently ignores the fact that many of these countries have been destabilized by the very powers that now reject their people. It's time to ask hard questions. Why are American and European multinational corporations allowed to profit from the destruction of these nations? Why do we ignore the role of regime changes, civil unrest, and economic exploitation in creating this global migration crisis? And an even more existential question, do we turn a blind eye because we intuit how this destruction we have wrought on these countries cushion the very comfortable lifestyle we are accustomed? What do you think? Are we missing the bigger picture when it comes to migration? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the policies and politics that shape our world. Thanks for watching the Political Pulse 2.0.